Hi, and welcome to another small disc golf video series. I'm Howard Cohen, and in this series I'm going to design and 3D print a new small golf disc. In the first episode, I'll design a new disc, and I hope it will be overstable. We'll see if it really is. It's hard to make a good overstable disc, and I'm going to discuss why, to the best of my knowledge, that some discs are overstable and some are not. Then I'm going to sketch the disc and take a picture of it, and I will transfer that into Fusion 360 in the second episode, where I will create a 3D model of that disc, which I will export, and in the third episode I'll use the Prusa slicer to prepare the G-code for my 3D printer, which in the fourth episode I will print. And I'll also take photos and produce an animated GIF that shows the disc rocking up and down using Fusion 360. In the fifth episode, I'll test the disc and critique the print, and in the sixth and final episodes, I'll publish the disc in the smalldiscgolf.org disc library, as well as printables and Thingiverse. A flying disc is both a wing and a gyro, and let's talk about them separately. This is a profile of an airplane wing, sort of an idealized one, and you can see that there's a middle point on the right side where there's a green arrow pointing directly at the front of the wing. That's a split point. And the air above that point goes over the top of the wing, and the air below that point goes to the bottom of the wing. The air doesn't have a choice, it just either encounters something that's sloping one direction or the other, and it takes the easy way. And all the air ends up at the back of the wing at the same time. But the paths that the air takes from above and the path that it takes below, they have a different length. The one on the top is more curved, and it's more distance, and so the air has to go faster to reach the end at the same time. If it didn't want to go faster, then the air in front of it would push it along. So because the stuff on the top is moving faster than the stuff on the bottom, the air pressure from above is lower than the bottom, and that gives the wing lift. And the lift is upward. As long as it can maintain its forward velocity, it could perhaps lift its own weight and more. If the wing points upward, like this, it's inclined, then the air splits at a different point. It still splits at the front, but the front has actually moved a little bit. You can see a couple of dotted lines on the right. And the direction of the wing is the white big arrow. It's moving forward. So the front is actually further around, and that means two things. One, the path along the top is longer now, so there's even more lift. But also, now the bottom is not horizontal anymore. It's actually an inclined plane. And the air along the bottom hits it, and some component of the force is directly upward, and the rest of it is horizontal, and that doesn't actually contribute to anything. But the component that's upward, represented by that small black arrow at the bottom next to pressure up, is a little bit more lift, and that combines with the lift from the top, and basically it's pressure on the bottom and a lack of pressure on top, and you end up with even more lift. The only problem is you also end up with more drag, because all the energy that goes into that pressure up arrow has to come from somewhere. So if you're unpowered like a glider or a disc, it means that it's going to be slowing down. And as it slows down, it's sort of a longer term problem because it slows down slowly. But as it slows down, that lift arrow gets smaller and smaller. And if it slows down enough, then it stops making lift or stops making sufficient lift and it falls to the ground. This is the profile of the disc I call the Flexi. It's actually the first indoor golf disc that I made that I liked, that it flew well. It's understable, but it still flies like a regular understable disc. So I'm looking at it here in profile, and if you look on the right side, you'll see some dotted lines, and you'll also see a red non-dotted line. Please just ignore the red non-dotted line. It doesn't mean anything at all in this context. The middle dotted line is roughly lined up with the split line on this disc. That is to say, the air either goes above or below that point on the edge of the disc. And if you look at how much disc there is above that line versus below that line, you'll see that there's like almost three times as much above as below. And just from the simplest viewpoint, not doing an integral across the entire shape or anything like that, but just figuring, hey, regardless of the curve, it's got to go this far out of its way, we know that the top is going to take it's going to be going a lot faster over the top. That means there's going to be excess lift above compared to lift below. This disc also has lift downward from the curve on the bottom. It isn't very much compared to the lift on the top. The lift on the top always wins. And the fact that the lift on the top wins is very important. This is the profile of a disc I call the Lofter, and it actually is even a little bit less extreme than the Flexi in terms of the ratio of the lift above the split line and below. But overall, it is a very thick wing. It's much thicker from the very top to the very bottom. And that's important because that means it has a lot more drag. And that means it slows down faster, both in terms of its forward velocity and its spin. The spin is incredibly important. The spin is what keeps it in the same plane as it flies. If you were to throw a disc in space, it would not be understable or overstable. It would simply go straight. That's because the understable and overstable is an aerodynamic response combined with the basic behavior of a gyro. So a gyro is like a bicycle wheel or a flying disc. And contrary to what might seem intuitive, if any force is applied to the disc, it doesn't behave the way you would think. If you apply an upward force to the disc because of lift, for example, it doesn't just move up. It interacts with the force of the gyro itself. The gyro wants to maintain its angular momentum, and when you apply a force to it, because it's moving, that force is also moving. It causes the disc to tilt. And if the lift is upward, it tilts to the left if it's spinning clockwise as seen from the top. And if the lift is down, it tilts to the right if it's spinning clockwise as seen from the top. Those correspond to understable, that is left, and overstable, that is right. This is an overstable disc. So first let me clarify that as the disk loses spin, it becomes understable. So even an overstable disk, if you throw it with insufficient spin, will be understable. And if you throw an overstable disk far enough, it will eventually lose enough speed and spin and it will become understable. So this disk is overstable, and as you can easily see, there's more wing below the split line than above the split line. The air has to go further to get around it. Some other things that help is that the top is completely flat. It's not domed like other disks, and that means that once it reaches the top where that dotted line meets the disk, it just goes straight back in the same way that air along the bottom just goes straight back. And so they're not racing each other anymore, and that means for that most of the disk, the air is not changing its speed. And that also means less drag. Usually there's a thin layer of air that hangs out close to the disk and doesn't get sucked away, and it acts like an air bearing. Kind of works that way on the bottom too. So this disk, if I were a righty and I threw it backhand, would spin to the right for most of its flight. You can design disks for the kind of behavior you want out of them. And you can make them understable or overstable. You can try to balance the two and come up with a disk that's very stable, doesn't go left or right. That's a balancing act, and it'll always depend on how fast it's going and how much spin you throw it with. Thanks for watching this smalldiscgolf.org video.